still not designing programs for who's there. We're designing these programs, for the baby or for the baby and a toddler. Who are the people? There's no other industry that does it backwards like this. Most, businesses that are successful figure out who it is they're serving or who their target market is, and they design something to match. That's not what we're doing. We just say, well, we can accommodate this.
Pamela Baston has more than 38 years of experience in the prevention and treatment of behavioral health disorders. She's the former director of Florida's Substance Abuse Agency, where she managed one of the nation's largest state behavioral health service systems at JBS International. She currently leads an innovative state project with the Child Welfare System to identify and engage opioid-using parents and align treatment and family court strategies. She's also an expert in evidence-based treatment practices for mothers and other women with behavioral health disorders and HIV/AIDS.
I have really two objectives. My first objective is to help people understand what it's like to have a substance use disorder, because a lot of these workers that are particularly those in the child welfare system really believe that these individuals are willfully being bad parents, that they're neglecting or abusing their children, that they're just using drugs to have fun, and get high and have a good time. And they don't always appreciate that the little children that they care so much about, that they'll think of as the innocent victims, are really those same parents that they're very upset with, that grew up to become those parents, that they were children themselves of maltreatment. And so the multi-generations is the issue we're having now. In fact, with the opioid use disorder, we're now in our fourth generation, 4 living generations of opioid use disorder. And that had not happened in my lifetime. That's primarily because of people who might be, you might have a grandparent who's addicted to prescription medications, who have an adult daughter, and that adult daughter may have a teenage daughter or son, and they may have a baby, and so you get all of these generations that are impacted by the same issues. And it's not just about quitting substances or that somebody's just willfully using. So I try to really help them understand the many pathways that people go through. And I've personally treated thousands of individuals. I've overseen the supervision of thousands more. And I have literally never once met somebody who woke up and said, today's a great day to develop a substance use disorder that will, ruin my life and my family, and I'll lose my home and my job and everything I care about and my dignity and my future, just because today's a good day to do that. That's not how it works. So it's a lot to get any workforce, whether it's child welfare, whether it's judicial, criminal justice, to understand the pathways are very complex, and that by the time that person's sitting in their office, they're probably multiple decades, at least 2 decades into their substance use disorder, and they're not going to come out of it overnight, and they need a lot more than they're getting to be successful.
So you can't take a chronic condition that is progressive. It's really apparent, needs to be handled right now. So that's like stage 3 or 4 of alcoholism, where you're already sick, you're already at the end, and now we throw it 30 days at you.
So when I first started in the field 40 years ago, we had much longer term treatment. Now we do drive-by treatment, essentially. And there's no other health condition that I know of that treats such a long-standing complex disorder with such brevity, with such minimal treatment dosage, and then expects this person to emerge in recovery. It just doesn't make any sense. And so it's very complicated, and that's one of my objectives is through the training that I do to help people understand what we call reasonable efforts. Is it reasonable to expect somebody who in the publicly funded system typically has no job or is underemployed, is a victim of domestic violence, often if they're female, also males, has low education typically, may have multiple children, may have all kinds of trauma, for Native Americans, historical trauma, and have all of, no transportation, unstable housing, and then say, pop in for a few outpatient sessions and let's get this all taken care of, and then expect somehow that that's going to work. And then, really the system is not giving them the shot that they need. And the policies are even worse. We take a lot of people that come out of maybe they go into jail, or maybe they lose their children temporarily in the child welfare system. And then because of that, we take the Medicaid away. So then we say, you want to get your kids back, you need to go to treatment. Well, we just took their payment mechanism away. We punish them by removing their Medicaid so that, and when that's what they needed to be able to fund the treatment that will help them get their children back. So the policies are also part of what I try to do, is to look at what are the barriers, the institutional barriers and the other barriers. And then also from a hopeful perspective, I've now been in all 50 states. I'm also working with a couple hundred tribes, and then also working with, and also in a couple U.S. territories. So I've seen a lot out there. And what I try to do is tell people, oh, this is a problem you're having. Well, why don't you go talk to the folks in Chicago, or, call these people in Pennsylvania, so I can try to cross-pollinate. And when there's pockets of really exciting things happening, or where there's some good policies, try to share those with others so that they can accelerate their progress.
So what you're describing is the power of stigma and bias, right? Mm-hmm. And unwillingness to really look at the issue. Now that you've been at this is clearly your life's work. Mm-hmm. As you sit there now, I must ask, what's left for you to accomplish in your life's work?
Probably the best way to answer that is that after this many years, I give myself permission to call out when I see things that are ridiculous, that don't make any sense, or that really work at cross purposes. So for example, just a few examples, and I wish these didn't happen, but in the last couple of weeks, in one instance, this treatment provider shared with me that they were afraid that if clients with opioid use disorders were given Suboxone, which is obviously a life-saving medication that we're very lucky to have, and they were afraid that it would be diverted on the street. And so instead of giving Suboxone out in a prescription like you would, where you would get it for 30 days and then you go back and renew your prescription and so forth, they were doling it out on a daily basis, maybe like methadone. But remember, the whole reason we got Suboxone was so that it didn't have to be, where you have to go every single day to a facility. It could be like any other mental health medication for depression. So I said to them, wow, okay, so you mean they're going to have to get in a car and drive to your program? And she said, yes. And I said, how far is that? She said, 120 miles. And I said, really, you're going to have these clients drive 100? I said, a 2-hour drive? And she said, oh, no, ma'am, it's a lot longer than that. It's mountain roads and this and that. And of course, I'm just coming unglued, but I'm trying really hard to be respectful, because I'm trying to understand the rationale here. And so then they said that they were doing this to avoid diversion. And so I said, well, how big of a problem is this diversion of Suboxone? Did you have data that drove this decision? Oh, no, but we just know that it could be diverted. So then that led me down the pathway. Well, so what do you really think happens with Suboxone being diverted? Do you really believe that these individuals that are, that have all this trauma, that have all these barriers, are setting up some kind of big, money-making machine where they're selling off Suboxone for a profit? Because that's really not how it works. If anything, they're, splitting their dose with their partner who can't afford treatment, or they're taking part of their dose and selling it to pay rent, or to put lunch money in their children's hands. And what have you have if let's say it does get diverted, which, no system is perfect, no medication is perfect. You can't really get high on it. It's really a life-saving medication. So what? On some level. So I can say things that I probably wouldn't have said, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that now it's, I just have to speak out, because some of the things that we're doing are ridiculous. And so I was able then, it took me about an hour to sit with this person and reason about, well, help me understand how that would look for somebody. And I gave them an example client, somebody that had 2 children, that was living alone, that was underemployed, that, and how is that going to work? And she says, oh, well, we give them a bus. They get on a bus and we can hold 40 people. But you're talking a half a day of driving to the program, getting your services and driving back every day for 4 to 5 hours minimum per day, every day. And I said, how long do you think those people we just spoke about are really going to be sticking with this? How many do you really believe will be there in 30 days? And she didn't answer. She didn't know because they just started. But I can answer. There will probably be 1 or 2 of the 40, if that many. There may be none. It's just not reasonable. And why would we do that? In this state, a woman who had a baby, she was on a methadone program, and so her baby did have some neonatal abstinence syndrome, which was to be expected because she was on a medication that was an opioid, and everybody prepared for this. And she was so wanting for this this baby to do everything right, and she hadn't with her other children. So, she read up on breastfeeding, and she learned everything that there was, and she met with her medical provider, and she understood everything that she should do with this baby so that it would be able to quickly have this, resolution of the neonatal abstinence syndrome, that it would just dissipate in a few days and everything would be great. So her well-meaning treatment provider, which was a residential program, decided they were afraid that she would abscond. So they did not allow her to room in, even though that is the absolute gold standard practice for a woman who has delivered a baby that has neonatal abstinence syndrome, and also to nurse the baby. And that calms the baby, it calms the mom, it enhances bonding, everything perfect. So the treatment program didn't let her room in, so they literally robbed her and her child of that critical bonding, and the hospital nurses poured her breast milk out because either they weren't educated or they didn't understand that the methadone in that breast milk the amount is so infinitesimal that it does not have any adverse effects, and the good effects of breastfeeding far outweigh any minimal issue. Yeah. And so we had 2 parts of the system that failed. And, out of this fear that she might leave if we don't force her to stay in this program all night long, not realizing that nothing would have kept that mom, her best chance was to stay with that baby and to develop that right out of the gate, that bond. And that would have kept her from running. This is every day. These things happen. And either people aren't applying the research and I don't think they're mean people. I don't think that they're not well-meaning. They just don't know, or they're not willing to try, to apply what should be the right way. The missing link in most models is housing. That's a problem everywhere. Even though I know we talk a lot about opioid and people say, meth is, we have a resurgence of meth. And I say, no, it's always been here. Didn't go anywhere. We now hear meth 2.0. Okay, whatever. It's back with a vengeance or what have you. But what's happened with meth is a lot of the housing was contaminated from meth labs. We have whole sections of public housing, particularly out west, that are no longer, habitable because they're contaminated, and the cost of decontaminating those houses isn't doable for a lot of these poor communities. So that just compounded a housing shortage we already had. And so to me, what I've seen in the only programs that I would say really are cutting edge are the programs that, first of all, understand the multi-generational nature of this problem, that serve all of the children in the whole family, whether that family are, married, not married, gay, whatever, mom and a grandmother, however the family is defined. Right now, what we do is we force women to choose between their recovery and their children, or their recovery and some of their children. You can take your baby, but you can't take the toddler, or you can take any 2 children under 10, and really we might have, 4 children, so we are forcing families to separate. And, yeah, we let mom go with the baby, and not let the 12-year-old go to treatment. But the 12-year-old has had 12 years of exposure to this problem. The baby's blissfully unaware where they were born and what might be happening. So it doesn't even make sense, some of this, what we're doing. But the programs that provide housing, that accept the entire family as they constitute, and that then treat the family as a unit, so they're really getting at these multiple generations, and that are holistic, that not only get that safe roof over their head, but also help with job skills and, dealing with all their trauma, and are a little bit longer term, are the programs that I've seen, and there's a handful of them. There aren't as many as there should be. We're still not designing programs for who's there. We're designing these programs, for the baby, or for the baby and a toddler. We don't look at, well, who are the people. There's no other industry that does it backwards like this. Most, businesses that are successful figure out who it is they're serving or who their target market is, and they design something to match. That's not what we're doing. Right. We just throw things up and residential programs up and say, well, we can accommodate this, And if that's all you can do, but you at least know where you're not serving a need and you're concurrently working on a plan to get there, that's okay. But there are some programs in Georgia actually designed not even by the addiction treatment system, but by the child welfare system, that, out of frustration over the fact that the drug treatment system wasn't upping their game, to respond to the need. And so they developed these programs. So I do see them. I ran one for many years. It had one of the highest success rates in the country. Probably to this day would have still had the best success rates of anywhere in the country. We took the entire family in. Didn't matter how many there were. We just made it happen. And we left no stone unturned. We made sure they had jobs. We did couples counseling. We did, all the work with the children. We did developmental assessment to see what kinds of delays the children might have had. We provided on-site therapeutic daycare for the kids. We worked with, estranged family members. We had every kind of therapeutic group and trauma therapy you could imagine. And parenting classes, literally everything. We looked at the whole person. And we just don't do that enough.
Well, that's expensive.
It was cheaper than outpatient. That's the thing. You know why? Because we used existing public housing stock. So what we did is we took families that were poor, which were the bulk of the people our publicly funded system serves anyway. We emptied it out temporarily, relocated those that did not have substance use problems, and then moved back in families that did. And they were able to stay for a year. There wasn't a set time. They could stay longer or not as long, but that was about what it took for the average family to get through. We did teach cooking, of course. We taught everyone 6 years of age and older how to cook in case there was any kind of relapse that the children are often having to fend for themselves. So it was like a simulated residential or simulated therapeutic community, but for the cost of an IOP, an intensive outpatient program. This is also the model that they use in Georgia, where they literally go find random apartment complexes, talk with the managers and say, can we rent from you some, contiguous apartments. One of the apartments is used as an outpatient office. And so all that counseling happens during the day, and there's groups and all of that. And then the families, are by themselves at night. These models are not expensive. They are not that hard to do. I have a saying, if we can put a man on the moon, we can figure this out. This is literally not rocket science. And I gave a speech recently called, Man in the Moon. And a person at the end stood up and said, I think given everything I know about today's treatment system, I would rather try to put a man on the moon than to fix what we have out there. But there are some good things out there. We know a lot about motivational interviewing. We have lots of other evidence-based practices. We have medications and more on the way that can enhance recovery. We finally have returned to what it was like when I first started in the field, which was embracing people in recovery to help with the effort. And so we have a lot in the mix that really can support these more innovative real-life models than we've ever had before. It's just, we just need to do it and to look at, what other kind of models make sense. But it has to include housing in multiple generations, or we've really missed the boat. In that same program that I used to run, which was a big residential program that was run in public housing, we served 100 people at any given time. We worked with more women than men, although the men were allowed to come if they did not have domestic violence. If they did, they had to go through perpetrators course and be cleared before they could join. But we had a robust job development program, and a number of the women were coming back from job seeking, not getting jobs, or the jobs they got were low level, like, housekeeping jobs. And so finally one day I asked them, why is this happening? And they said, oh, well, at our Job Corps, and that wasn't the right name, but there was like a group that you go to help develop jobs. We're told that was the best that they could ever hope for, that these are the kind of jobs that they were more in their lane and more up their alley. And I was embarrassed to realize that this had been going on for probably 6 or 8 months, that I just didn't put two and two together to realize that this pressure was being brought from the outside. And so I was just shocked that anybody would tell these women, and you think about the things that they were able to do. They were able to put 2 feet on the floor every morning and move forward despite years of violence and abuse and being face down on some nasty mattress in a crack house over and over. And, and yet here they were seeking recovery, were trying to be self-sufficient and all excited and with their newfound recovery, getting jobs. And we're told, no, this is all you can hope for in your life. So, I marched down there and had a very unpleasant conversation with the gentleman who was in charge, who readily admitted, I was expecting him to deny all of this. And he said, no, we really prefer to serve, white men and veterans. And we don't want to serve these clients that you keep sending to us. And so they were purposely working at cross purposes. And so that was one, because if you can't have self-sufficiency, none of this matters, because then, it doesn't matter how much recovery you have if you can't survive. And if you can't survive, and your family can't survive. So anyway, that was one. The other is a policy change where I learned that people were being denied Medicaid after they had their children removed from the home, and yet they were told they had to get treatment in order to get their children back. And I was going all over this one particular state. Wherever I went, I kept hearing the same story. So I marched myself into the head of Medicaid and said, this doesn't make any sense. Just help me understand why would you remove this opportunity for these women, and sometimes it was men, to get treatment just because their kids were taken out of their care temporarily. And they assured me this was not happening. I was completely wrong. So I let it go for a few more weeks and then went back again after I continued to hear this. And she was very defiant, and she called in her data people and said, just look at this. I know that this is really not happening. And it was happening. It was a little glitch or something. It actually wasn't even intended to be this policy barrier, but it was. And so they got it fixed, and I insisted that she please send out a memo so that everybody would know, this is changed now. You can actually get treatment paid for so that you can get your children back. I don't know how many hundreds or maybe more families were able to get kids back because they got to get the treatment that they needed. After 40 years, you have, a lot of wins like that, that just happened for connecting the dots.